What if the man who once stood as a golden symbol of American cinema had secrets buried beneath the very ground he walked on? What if the beloved star whose films taught us about love, justice, and survival had a story so dark it would shake even the most loyal admirer? And here's the question that chills you to your core. What happens when the truth about an icon isn't found in the spotlight, but in the shadows of a tunnel no one was supposed to enter? Robert Redford, a name that feels safe, almost comforting. The rugged smile, the sandy hair, the natural charisma that made audiences swoon. He was the man America trusted, the man whose films weren't just entertainment but reflections of who we were as a nation. He wasn't just another Hollywood star. He was the embodiment of decency, integrity, and artistry. But isn't it always the case that the higher we build someone up, the greater the fall when the mask finally slips? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Now picture this. An FBI team approaches his Utah estate. The man is gone, having passed away peacefully at 89, but his home, the sanctuary he built away from the chaos of Hollywood, still stands. A sprawling fortress hidden in the mountains, wrapped in silence. From the outside, it's serene, beautiful, almost holy. But inside, something else stirs. Because when agents broke ground, their flashlights revealed a hollow echo beneath the floors. And that's when the nightmare began. Why does this matter now, you ask? Because heroes aren't supposed to have secrets this terrible. Because America clings to its icons like a life raft in stormy seas. Redford was one of the last of the old guard, one of the final bridges between Golden Age Hollywood and the modern era. His passing was supposed to be a moment of national reflection. Instead, it became a doorway into a labyrinth of fear, deception, and questions no one ever wanted answered. And let me ask you this directly. When you think of your favorite celebrity, do you ever wonder what they're hiding? Behind the smiles, the charity work, the awards, what's buried deep in the private corridors of their lives? What if we only know the version of them they allow us to see? For decades, Redford was praised as a man of the people. He launched Sundance, he fought for environmental causes, he represented dignity in an industry often drowning in scandal. He was the voice of independence. But think about it. What better cover for darkness than a reputation bathed in light? Isn't it true that sometimes the most trusted figures are the ones we never think to question? Imagine the shock when whispers began to circle. At first, quiet murmurs, nothing more than background noise. Suggestions that not everything about his secluded mansion was as pristine as it seemed. Who would believe it? Not the fans, not the critics, not even his peers. And yet, those whispers grew louder, until they reached the ears of those who could no longer ignore them. The FBI. Let's pause here. Put yourself in that moment. You're an agent, stepping into the home of one of the most respected figures in American history. You expect nothing more than dust, perhaps some personal keepsakes, the remnants of a legend's private life. You brace for nostalgia, not horror. But then, your boot hits the floor, and the sound isn't solid, it's hollow. That sound changes everything. Because beneath the illusion of stability, there's an entire world that wasn't supposed to exist. A world of tunnels, a world of silence, a world of secrets. And as the first crack opens in that illusion, a flood of questions pours in. Why did Redford build this? What was he hiding? Was it his secret alone, or did others know? And the most terrifying question of all, what exactly is lying in the darkness, waiting to be discovered? Do you feel that chill? That slow, creeping dread that maybe the truth isn't something you want to know, but something you can't look away from? That's the same chill the agents felt as they pulled back the panels, as they leaned into the earth beneath the legend, and as their flashlights pierced the unknown. Robert Redford was supposed to be the man who gave us Sundance, who gave young filmmakers a voice, who gave audiences stories that made sense of a complicated America. But in death, what he gave us was something far darker, a mystery that forces us to question everything we thought we knew about him. Now here's the cruel irony. For years, Redford made films about exposing lies, about peeling back the curtain on corruption and deceit. He made heroes out of characters who dared to challenge the truth. But what happens when the storyteller becomes the story? What happens when the man pointing the camera at the shadows becomes the shadow himself? That's why this story matters. Because it isn't just about Robert Redford. It's about all of us. It's about the way we build idols, the way we blind ourselves to reality, the way we let charisma become camouflage. How many other legends, how many other icons are carrying secrets so dark that their legacies could crumble in an instant. And just when you think you've got your footing, that you understand what's going on, the ground shifts again. Because the tunnel wasn't empty. It wasn't just a hidden architectural quirk or a relic of paranoid design. No, the tunnel contained something else. Something lifeless. Something terrifying. Something that made hardened agents recoil in shock. But before we reveal what they found inside, we need to take a step back. To truly understand how the FBI ended up in Robert Redford's mansion in the first place, you need to know the full story. And believe me, it's darker and stranger than anyone could have imagined. Because the tunnel was just the beginning. And what came next would change everything, forever. What if the man you thought you knew, the golden-haired charmer, the independent voice of Hollywood, the activist who stood for the environment, wasn't who he seemed to be at all? What if behind the warmth of Robert Redford's smile, behind the prestige of his Oscars and the glory of his Sundance empire, there existed shadows no camera ever caught? You see, every legend carries two faces, the one the world celebrates, and the one hidden away where no one dares look. The shocking part is that sometimes those shadows aren't just whispers, but entire worlds buried beneath the floorboards. Robert Redford wasn't simply a celebrity. He was a symbol. Think about it. In an industry full of scandal, he somehow managed to remain untouchable. A clean image, a man of substance, an artist who seemed above the chaos. Wasn't that the allure? That you could look at Redford and believe in the possibility of integrity in a town built on deception? But let me ask you this. Was that aura of decency part of the act all along? Was America's golden boy hiding a darker script written not for the screen, but for real life? From the start, Redford's story was mythic. A boy from California, a dreamer who rose out of obscurity to become one of the most recognized faces in the world. The rebel who starred in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. The con man with a heart in the sting. The tortured father and director behind Ordinary People. Each role stitched into the fabric of American culture. Each performance reinforcing the idea that this man wasn't just talented, he was trustworthy. But that's the danger of legends, isn't it? We confuse the roles with the reality. We assume that the man on screen is the same man off it. And that's where the blind spot begins. Fans adored him, critics praised him, and even his peers respected him. He wasn't like the others, they said. He wasn't scandal-prone. He wasn't reckless. He wasn't the type to get caught up in the darker currents of fame. But think about it carefully. Isn't that exactly what makes someone immune to suspicion? When no one is looking, when no one is asking questions, what's stopping the truth from becoming whatever they want it to be? And this is where the cracks first appear. Behind the curtain of his public life, there were always whispers. Not loud enough to make headlines, not bold enough to stick, but they're all the same. Strange visitors at his Utah property. Odd construction noises at odd hours. Staff who stayed quiet longer than they should have. If you dig deep enough into the background, the silence itself becomes suspicious. Doesn't silence often scream louder than words? Consider the mansion in Utah. To most, it was just a retreat. A place for Redford to escape Hollywood, to breathe in mountain air, to focus on his environmental projects. But locals in the area often wondered why so much of the property seemed off-limits. Why visitors who came for Sundance connections were suddenly cut off from certain wings of the estate. Why deliveries came at night, long after the town had fallen asleep. Doesn't it feel strange that a man who championed openness and creativity would need such walls of secrecy around his personal life? And here's the chilling thought. What if the walls weren't enough? What if the very earth beneath his home became the hiding place for things he didn't want the world to know? When you imagine the FBI standing there, boots pressing into floorboards that echo hollow, doesn't your mind spiral? What could possibly justify that kind of design? A hideaway? A bunker? Or something far worse? Let's not forget, this is Robert Redford we're talking about. Not some faceless billionaire, not a politician known for backroom deals, but a man who played heroes. The outlaw with charm. The journalist who exposed lies. The leader who stood against injustice. That's why the discovery feels so jarring. Because when the hero's mask slips, the betrayal cuts deeper. How do you reconcile the man who inspired generations with the man whose home hid a tunnel lined with lifeless secrets? And maybe that's the real horror. That it wasn't just a man falling from grace. It was the collective realization that we never really knew him at all. Because if Robert Redford, of all people, could be tied to something like this, then what does that say about the others? What does it say about the way we worship fame? What does it say about the trust we give so freely to those we admire? Imagine sitting in a dark theater, watching one of his classics. The lights flicker across the screen, his face larger than life, his words echoing through the speakers. You're lost in the story, you're swept away by the performance. But now imagine knowing what lay beneath his own home. Imagine knowing that while he was building dreams on screen, nightmares may have been festering underground. Would you watch him the same way again? Could you? It's ironic, isn't it? Redford built his career on exposing lies. All the President's Men wasn't just a film. It was a manifesto of truth-telling, of holding power accountable. Yet here we are, talking about him not as the exposer of secrets, but as the center of one. The roles reverse, and suddenly the storyteller becomes the subject, the hero becomes the suspect. Isn't that the cruelest twist of all? And yet, this is only the beginning. The whispers that haunted his later years, the mansion that stood like a fortress, the hollow floorboards that betrayed the secret beneath, it all points to one thing. There was more to Robert Redford than the world was ever meant to see. And once the FBI began their descent into that darkness, the world's image of him would never be the same again. Because the beloved icon was never just a man. He was a mystery wrapped in applause, cloaked in awards, and now, unearthed by shadows. But here's where the chill sharpens. The whispers that drew the FBI weren't random. They weren't coincidences. They were signals pointing to something long concealed. And when the Bureau finally followed the trail to the Utah mansion, they weren't prepared for what awaited. Because the mansion wasn't just a fortress. It was a mask. And behind that mask, beneath the mountain soil, lay a secret that would force the world to look at Robert Redford not as a hero, not as an artist, but as a man with shadows no one dared imagine. But the mansion itself, that fortress of silence, tells another story, a story we need to step into next. What makes a home a fortress? Is it the walls that rise high against prying eyes, the gates that guard against unwanted visitors, or the secrets sealed deep within its foundations? Robert Redford's Utah estate was no ordinary property. It wasn't simply a home for rest and retreat. It was a sprawling, secluded world of its own, a structure designed to keep people out, or perhaps to keep something in. And when the FBI first approached those gates, they weren't just stepping into a Hollywood legend's hideaway. They were walking into a carefully crafted puzzle, one that had been hiding in plain sight for decades. From the outside, the mansion seemed idyllic. Nestled in the Wasatch Mountains, surrounded by acres of forest and wildlife, it looked like the perfect escape from Hollywood chaos. Redford had long despised the artificial glamour of Los Angeles, preferring the raw honesty of nature. His estate reflected that choice. Wooden beams, stone walls, vast windows that framed mountain views like paintings. To his admirers, the house was a sanctuary, proof that even in wealth, he had chosen simplicity. But the FBI saw something else. The property wasn't just private, it was impenetrable. High fences, unmarked trails, security cameras discreetly hidden among trees. Why would a man known for openness and artistry construct what looked less like a retreat and more like a fortress? Neighbors noticed odd things too. Delivery trucks pulling up at strange hours, unloading cargo that was never explained. Construction sounds echoing in the night long after the original mansion was supposedly finished. And then there was the silence. Staff members rotated in and out with unusual speed, most refusing to speak publicly about their time there. When asked about the mansion, locals grew uneasy, often changing the subject or offering vague responses. Doesn't it make you wonder, what exactly were they afraid of? The FBI had to tread carefully. This wasn't just any property. It belonged to a man the nation revered. Even in death, Redford commanded respect. Breaking into his sanctuary without cause would be a scandal in itself. But once they had reason, once the whispers grew too loud to ignore, they realized the mansion wasn't what it appeared to be. Imagine stepping inside. You'd expect warmth, rustic furniture, shelves of books, film memorabilia, family photographs. And yes, those things were there. But woven into that charm was something colder. Rooms that led nowhere. Hallways that bent at odd angles. Locked doors with no keys in sight. Certain areas seemed designed less for comfort and more for concealment. You'd have to ask yourself, was this the home of a beloved actor, or the lair of a man who had something he never wanted discovered? Then there's the matter of the blueprints. Records show that several additions to the property had been made over the years, yet the official plans never matched what contractors recalled building. Rooms seemed to vanish. Others appeared where none had existed before. Basements deeper than necessary, reinforced walls far stronger than standard design. Why? Was Redford simply obsessed with security, or was he hiding something? The FBI agents who entered that mansion weren't stepping into a house. They were stepping into a labyrinth. Every corner carried tension. Every locked door whispered a warning. And beneath their feet, though they didn't know it yet, a secret world waited. But before they uncovered it, they noticed something else, the sheer paranoia etched into the design. Think about this. Redford was a man who preached independence, creativity, freedom. Yet his estate screamed of fear, of control, of secrecy. Why would a man celebrated for openness build a home that looked more like a fortress or a prison? Was he protecting himself from the outside world? Or was he terrified of someone or something, finding what he'd buried within? And here's the part that makes your skin crawl. The agents reported that the house felt alive, as though it were built to observe them as much as they observed it. Tiny holes in walls that suggested hidden surveillance. Odd vents leading not to the outside, but somewhere deeper underground. Even the air felt heavy, as though the mansion itself were holding its breath. Locals later revealed that they had rarely seen Redford beyond certain parts of his property in his final years. He stayed close to the mansion, often disappearing for hours at a time, not into town, not into the open wilderness he claimed to love, but into his house. Where did he go? What occupied those hours of silence? If the house was a fortress, was it guarding his privacy, or guarding something far worse? And as the agents pressed deeper, they found signs, subtle, chilling signs, that the mansion wasn't just protecting secrets above ground. Scratches on basement walls, newer cement patches that stood out against older stone, reinforced steel doors hidden behind panels. Each clue pointed downward. Something was beneath them, waiting to be uncovered. Picture that moment. Agents standing in the dim light of a basement, their flashlights scanning across the uneven floor. They know something's wrong. Their boots strike the ground, and it sounds hollow. That sound, that hollow echo, that was the first crack in the fortress. Because the mansion wasn't just a home. It was a mask, and beneath that mask lay the tunnel that would unravel everything the world thought it knew about Robert Redford. But if the house was a fortress, then the tunnel was the prison. And what it contained would make even the bravest agent pale. It all began with a single phone call. That's how most great investigations start. Not with a dramatic raid, not with headlines blazing across the news, but with a quiet voice on the other end of the line. A whisper, a warning, a fragment of truth so unsettling that the FBI couldn't afford to ignore it. And in Robert Redford's case, that call was the spark that set everything in motion. Picture the scene. A late evening inside an FBI office. Phones ringing, agents scanning reports, the usual hum of bureaucracy. Then, a line lights up. The caller doesn't give a name, doesn't ask for recognition. Instead, they deliver a statement so cryptic it could have been dismissed as nonsense, if it hadn't included details only an insider would know. There's something under the house, the voice said. It's not safe. It's not what you think. At first, skepticism. Celebrities have long been the targets of wild rumors. The Bureau is used to crank calls, hoaxes, conspiracy theorists with vivid imaginations. But this was different. The caller knew specific structural details of Redford's Utah mansion, details that weren't public. They described sections of the property that didn't appear on any official blueprint. They mentioned construction crews brought in under fake company names, some of whom had vanished after the work was completed. How could an anonymous stranger know so much? The Bureau pulled Redford's file. As with most high-profile figures, there was already a thin dossier. Nothing scandalous, at least, nothing proven. Mentions of reclusive behavior. Notes about his obsessive privacy. Reports from locals about strange deliveries in the middle of the night. None of it concrete enough to justify action. But in light of the tip-off, those scattered pieces started to look less like coincidences and more like puzzle pieces. Then came the breakthrough. A former worker, reluctant at first, finally spoke. He admitted he had been part of a construction crew tasked with reinforcing underground passages. We thought it was for storage, he confessed. But the deeper we dug, the more it didn't make sense. Thick concrete, reinforced steel, and Redford himself watching every step, making sure we never strayed from the design. It felt wrong. The worker described doors that didn't lead anywhere, passages that were sealed off before they could be finished. And then, his voice dropped. We weren't supposed to ask questions. We were paid well. But when the job ended, some of the guys just disappeared. Now the Bureau couldn't ignore it. The anonymous call, the missing workers, the strange deliveries, the mansion that seemed more like a bunker. The pieces aligned into a chilling picture. This wasn't just a celebrity hiding a panic room or a wine cellar. This was something far bigger, far darker. So the FBI prepared. Warrants were quietly discussed, surveillance teams dispatched. They knew Redford was gone, but that didn't make the mansion any less dangerous. In fact, his death made it more urgent. What if the secrets beneath that house were never meant to be found? What if they were designed to be buried forever with him? And let me ask you directly. If you were an agent, standing at the edge of that property, knowing you were about to descend into the private world of Robert Redford, would your hands shake? Would you wonder if you were about to discover something so terrible it would rewrite the way America remembered him? Because the closer they got to breaking inside, the more the tension grew. Something about the mansion radiated unease. Dogs wouldn't go near it. Locals crossed the street to avoid walking past. Even the air felt heavier as the agents stood outside the gates, preparing to enter. And when they finally did, when their boots crossed the threshold and their flashlights cut through the silence, the first thing they noticed wasn't the grandeur of the home. It was the smell. A faint, metallic tang in the air. A warning that what lay beneath wasn't going to be beautiful. But they hadn't reached the basement yet. They hadn't struck the hollow ground. That moment, the sound of boots hitting something that didn't belong, was still waiting. And when it came, nothing could prepare them for the truth. Imagine it. You're standing inside Robert Redford's mansion, a place once thought of as nothing more than a Hollywood legend's private retreat. The air is still, almost reverent, as though the house itself knows it holds something sacred or something sinister. The agents take slow, measured steps, their flashlights sweeping across the walls. Dust lingers in the beams of light. Family portraits smile back at them, the faces of a man who gave the world art, love stories, and moral clarity. But then, something doesn't fit. A smell hangs in the air. Faint at first. Metallic. Sharp. A smell that tells the body something is wrong long before the mind catches up. The agents exchange glances. One coughs, muttering that it doesn't smell like dust or mildew, the things you expect in an old house. No, this smell is different. Sour. Heavy. Like iron and rot mingled together. Anyone who has worked enough crime scenes knows that smell. The human body doesn't easily forget it. It clings to you, lingers in your clothes, your hair, your lungs. And now, here it was, inside the mansion of one of America's most beloved stars. They move toward the source, down into the basement. The air grows thicker with every step. The house, once warm and rustic, now feels cold and oppressive. Shadows stretch long across stone walls. Their boots scrape against concrete, echoing unnaturally. And then, a sound interrupts everything. Hollow. One agent stomps again. Hollow. The floor is lying. The team stops. Heartbeats quicken. They know what this means. The blueprints didn't show this. The house wasn't supposed to have hollow spaces beneath. Someone built something down there deliberately, and they built it to be hidden. The agents begin their work. Tools scrape against the floor as they pry at panels, searching for seams. At first, nothing. Just resistance, silence, the house clinging to its secrets. And then, a crack. A panel shifts. Dust shoots upward, filling the air with a bitter, suffocating cloud. Beneath, the dark outline of a passageway emerges. A tunnel. Flashlights aim downward. The beam cuts through the blackness, revealing stone and steel beneath the mansion. The air that rushes out is colder, heavier, fouler. The smell intensifies. One agent recoils, gagging, muttering that whatever lies down there hasn't seen the light of day in years, maybe decades. But they press on. They have to. Step by step, their boots echo against the hidden floor. The walls are narrow, too narrow for comfort, forcing them to move in single file. Pipes run along the ceiling, dripping condensation. The deeper they go, the more the air thickens, pressing against their chests. Each breath feels heavier, harder to pull. And then, the noise. Not from them, not from their own movements, but from the tunnel itself. A faint hum, almost mechanical. A vibration underfoot, like something buried deep within the earth was still alive, still functioning. They stop, shine their lights upward, downward, around. Nothing but stone and shadows. And yet, the sound persists. Tension rises. One agent whispers, "This wasn't a home. This was a fortress." Another mutters, "Or a prison." The deeper they descend, the more the tunnel resists them. It twists, bends, doubles back on itself, as though designed to disorient intruders. The walls, once rough stone, begin to look reinforced, smoothed with cement, lined with steel bars in places. Whoever built this didn't just want it hidden, they wanted it strong enough to last forever. And then it happens. Their flashlights catch something on the ground. A stain. Dark, dried, but unmistakable. The metallic smell now has a face. They crouch, touch the concrete. Their gloves come away marked with something that sends shivers down their spines. Blood. Not fresh, not recent, but real. The agents fall silent. No one needs to speak. They all know what this means. They've stumbled into something far beyond architectural oddities or eccentric design. This isn't a quirk of a paranoid celebrity. This is evidence. This is crime. But it isn't the blood that stops them cold. It's what they see when they shine their lights further down the tunnel. The faint outline of something slumped against the wall. Motionless. Human-shaped. One agent raises his light higher, his voice breaking as he whispers, "Oh my God." And in that moment, the truth begins to reveal itself. Because what lay at the end of that tunnel wasn't just a passage. It was a grave. But what they saw next would turn shock into horror. The tunnel stretched out before them like the throat of some sleeping beast, swallowing their light and spitting it back in fragments. Each step the agents took seemed to echo louder than the last, as though the earth itself was listening. And with every inch they pressed forward, the smell grew worse. Metallic. Sour. The unmistakable stench of death that no amount of concrete could seal away forever. At first, they thought it might be nothing more than an old storage passage. After all, eccentric millionaires and celebrities often commissioned bizarre additions to their homes. Panic rooms, bunkers, wine cellars disguised as dungeons. But this wasn't that. No wine racks. No stockpiles of canned goods. No memorabilia from Hollywood days gone by. The further they went, the more apparent it became. This tunnel wasn't for storing objects. It was for hiding truths. The walls were too precise. Reinforced concrete lined with steel beams, as if built to withstand collapse. Whoever designed it wanted it permanent. They noticed symbols scratched faintly into the stone, as though someone had marked their presence long ago. Circles, arrows, words half-faded by moisture and time. Were these construction notes, or desperate messages left by those trapped inside? And then came the door. A slab of rusting metal wedged into the wall, bolted shut from the outside. The agents froze. Why bolt a door from the outside unless you meant to keep something in? Their gloved hands traced the grooves of the bolts, their flashlights flickering over the corroded surface. One whispered, "This isn't just a passage. This is a cell." They forced the bolts free. The screech of metal echoed through the tunnel like a scream, bouncing back at them until it felt as though the whole underground world was wailing. The smell intensified. The air itself seemed to push against them, heavy and suffocating. And then, with a final shove, the door creaked open. What lay beyond was a chamber. Small, claustrophobic. The kind of place where time itself felt trapped. The walls were damp, streaked with something dark. A cot sat in one corner, rusted chains dangling from the frame. Not props. Not decorative. Real. Functional. The agents stared at them in stunned silence. This wasn't storage. This wasn't paranoia. This was captivity. But it wasn't empty. In the farthest corner of the room, their lights caught the unmistakable outline of a figure slumped against the wall. Motionless. Shrunken. Lifeless. One agent stumbled back, hand clamped over his mouth, his breath ragged. Another whispered, "Oh, God." The figure wasn't alone. There were more. Shapes sprawled against the cold stone, hidden in shadows until the beams of light forced them into view. Bodies. Some little more than skeletons. others disturbingly preserved by the cool underground air. Clothing still clung to bones and tatters. Jewelry glittered faintly on skeletal fingers. These weren't nameless remains buried by accident. They were people, and they had been left here deliberately. The agents' radios crackled with panicked voices. Reinforcements were called. Photographs snapped. Each click of the camera felt obscene, intruding on the silent suffering of the forgotten. And here's where the questions began to multiply. Who were they? How long had they been there? How could anyone, not even a Hollywood giant, live above such a graveyard without suspicion gnawing at their conscience? As the agents inspected the room, they found more signs. Scratches etched into the walls, desperate messages clawed out by hands that knew they would never leave. Help. Why? Dates. Names. The ghosts of voices silenced forever. The Bureau didn't say it aloud, but the truth was plain. These weren't just remains. These were stories, lives ended, identities erased, suffering hidden in the earth beneath a mansion the world had celebrated as a symbol of artistic triumph. And as the agents reeled, one of them spotted something else. Another door. Smaller. Concealed behind a rotting cabinet. Not as heavily bolted, but locked nonetheless. A fresh wave of dread swept over the team. If the first door had revealed a chamber of bodies, what horrors might wait behind the next? Their hands trembled as they prepared to open it. The tunnel wasn't done with them yet, because the chamber they had just discovered was only the beginning. And what came next would drag Robert Redford's legacy into a darkness no one could have ever imagined. The second door gave way with a groan so deep it seemed to vibrate through the agents' bones. Their flashlights trembled in their hands as beams cut through the stale, suffocating darkness. And then, it happened. The lights landed on shapes. Not one, not two, dozens. Bodies. Scattered across the chamber like forgotten dolls, some slumped against walls, others lying flat, arms curled unnaturally, mouths frozen in eternal silence. The agents froze, unable to speak. Even veterans. Men and women who had worked on the worst of cases stood motionless, their faces pale. Because no training manual prepares you for this. No field exercise readies you for a room filled with lifeless bodies beneath the home of one of America's most beloved stars. The smell was overwhelming now. Sweet and sickly, the unmistakable perfume of decay mixed with earth and rust. Some remains were skeletal, time having reduced them to bone and scraps of fabric. Others were disturbingly intact, preserved by the damp chill of the underground air. The light reflected off patches of hair still clinging to skulls, off teeth bared in grotesque parodies of smiles. And the silence, my God, the silence, was louder than any scream. One agent whispered, "How long have they been here?" His voice cracked. Another muttered, "Decades." At least, their minds reeled with questions. Who were these people? Why were they here? How could this go unnoticed for so long? As their lights swept across the chamber, details emerged. A woman's shoe, elegant but outdated, still on a skeletal foot. A child's bracelet, plastic beads spelling out half-faded letters. Rings, watches, purses. These weren't nameless shadows. They were people with lives, with families, with stories abruptly severed. And here's the thought that chilled the agents most. Someone brought them here. Someone chose to end their lives beneath this mansion. Someone, while the world saw a smiling star on screen, was orchestrating a nightmare underground. The FBI began to document everything. Photographs snapped, measurements taken, samples collected. But every time a camera flash lit up the chamber, the room seemed to scream back at them, the light exposing horrors that preferred the dark. One agent swore he heard something, soft, almost like a whisper. Another said it was just the echo of their own breath bouncing off the stone. But in a place like this, could you ever be sure? And then, as if the horror weren't enough, they found something more chilling than the bodies themselves. Etched into the walls above the slumped figures were markings. Not random scratches this time, but deliberate carvings. Symbols, numbers, phrases in shaky handwriting. One read, "Still waiting." Another, "He promised." A third, barely legible, "No escape." The agents looked at each other, dread thick in their throats. Were these final words of the victims? Or were they left by someone else? Someone orchestrating whatever madness had unfolded here? And then, the cruelest twist. Among the bodies, they found evidence of recent disturbance. Dust patterns broken, footprints, faint but visible, leading deeper into the tunnel. Someone had been here not long ago. Someone alive. The thought chilled them more than the bodies. Because if someone had been down here recently, then the nightmare wasn't just history, it might still be alive. The lead agent steadied himself, forced his voice not to tremble. "We keep going," he said. His words echoed against the chamber walls, falling flat against the silence of the dead. Step by step, they followed the footprints, deeper into the tunnel, leaving behind the chamber of lifeless bodies. Every agent knew what they had just seen would haunt them forever, but none of them realized that what lay ahead would be even worse. Because the bodies were not the final horror. They were only the first revelation, and the next discovery would turn shock into suspicion, forcing the agents to ask the unthinkable. How much did Robert Redford know? The chamber was a graveyard, but the FBI knew they couldn't stop at shock. Every body had a name once. Every face, even if reduced to bone, belonged to someone who had been alive, breathing, loved. And that meant one thing: identification. Agents in hazmat suits moved carefully, documenting each position, photographing every angle, cataloging every object. The room became a crime scene, no longer just a chamber of horror, but a mosaic of clues waiting to be pieced together. Rings, watches, necklaces, torn scraps of clothing that still bore designer labels, purses with faded initials. These weren't drifters or nameless wanderers. These were people of status, people who had been missed. One agent lifted a wallet half buried beneath debris. Inside, a driver's license. Faded, but legible. The name on it matched a missing persons report from the early 1990s. A woman from Los Angeles. A socialite who had disappeared after attending an event at Sundance. Suddenly, the theory of random victims collapsed. This was personal. This was connected. The Bureau pulled out old case files, cross-referencing jewelry and clothing styles with decades of missing person databases. The overlap was undeniable. Several victims had vanished in Utah, their last known locations disturbingly close to Redford's property. Others had been reported missing in Hollywood circles, their names once whispered in tabloids before fading into obscurity. And then came the breakthrough that made even hardened agents pale. One set of remains was identified through dental records as a woman who had been a rising actress in the late 1980s. She had attended the Sundance Film Festival, her career on the verge of breakthrough. And then, she vanished. Her case had baffled investigators for years, written off as another starlet swallowed by Hollywood's cruelty. But here she was, in the cold earth beneath Redford's mansion. The connections grew darker. A businessman who once clashed with Redford over land rights in Utah. A journalist who had been digging into questionable financial dealings surrounding Sundance. A contractor rumored to have worked on Redford's estate before disappearing without a trace. Piece by piece, the victims painted a picture that was impossible to ignore. They were connected, each in some way, to Redford's orbit. Can you imagine the shock? A man idolized as the champion of independent voices, the creator of Sundance. A festival meant to give the voiceless a platform, was now surrounded by the silent voices of the dead beneath his very home. The irony was almost too cruel to stomach. But here's where the story twists again. Among the identified victims, one stood out. A name known not just to investigators, but to Hollywood itself. An actress who had starred in a film alongside Redford decades ago. She had been close to him, some even speculated romantically linked. Her disappearance had always raised questions, but nothing had ever been proven. And now, here she was, lying among the others. The FBI agents were shaken. This wasn't just a random tunnel of horror. This was a carefully curated silence, a place where inconvenient people simply vanished. And the deeper they dug, the more it seemed the tunnel wasn't just about hiding bodies. It was about erasing stories. But then, something surfaced that no one expected. A small notebook, half buried in the dirt near one of the bodies. Its pages were damp, some destroyed, but a few remained intact. On them, scrawled in hurried handwriting, were names. Names that matched the missing. Names that matched the bodies. And at the bottom of one page, a phrase that froze the room. They trusted him. What did it mean? Who wrote it? A victim, scribbling in desperation? Or someone else entirely, documenting their silence like a ledger? The FBI's job was clear. Uncover the full truth. Name every victim. and find out how this tunnel of secrets came to exist beneath the home of Robert Redford. But as the names began to match the bodies, one thing became undeniable. The victims weren't strangers to him. They were people he knew, people who had circled his world. And if he knew them, then the unthinkable had to be asked. How much did Redford himself know about what lay beneath his mansion? But the answer wasn't in the bodies alone. It was in the man behind the mask. And what the FBI uncovered next would drag Robert Redford's carefully polished image into a darkness so deep, no amount of Oscars or accolades could ever cleanse it. What do you really know about Robert Redford? Not the smiling golden boy framed on cinema posters. Not the polished Oscar winner delivering acceptance speeches. Not the elder statesman of Hollywood who built an empire out of Sundance. No, I mean the man in private. The man behind closed doors. The man who spent decades cultivating an image so spotless, so untouchable, that even whispers of scandal evaporated before they ever reached daylight. Because here's the truth that chills you. The more perfect the public mask, the darker the shadows it hides. Robert Redford's public life was a script, rehearsed and refined over decades. But his private life? That was a labyrinth. And if the FBI's discoveries beneath his mansion revealed anything, it was that the man America adored may have lived a life of contradictions so stark, so chilling, that even his closest allies would never admit to seeing them. Start with his obsession with control. For years, Redford was described as intensely private. To fans, this was framed as humility, an artist who valued peace over fame. But former associates painted a different picture. He didn't just crave privacy. He demanded it. He dictated what could and could not be said about him. Staff signed strict non-disclosure agreements. Contractors were required to hand over their phones during jobs. Friends whispered that his parties were warm on the surface, but filled with unspoken rules. No cameras, no questions, no wandering beyond certain areas of the house. Doesn't that sound less like hospitality and more like secrecy disguised as charm? Then there was his peculiar relationship with Sundance. To the world, Sundance was Redford's gift to independent film, a beacon of artistic freedom. But behind the scenes, reports hinted at a darker dynamic. Filmmakers spoke of Redford's looming presence, of projects mysteriously buried, of careers inexplicably stalled. Some even claimed that his influence extended far beyond what was visible, that Sundance wasn't just a festival, but a gatekeeper, and Redford held the keys. If someone crossed him, were they simply blacklisted or erased in ways far worse? And think about his mansion. Why did he build it like a fortress? Why the high fences, the surveillance, the endless expansions that never matched official blueprints? One former worker confessed that Redford himself would stand for hours watching the crews, saying little, but ensuring every brick fell exactly where he wanted. Almost as though he wasn't building a home, but a hidden stage set. Each tunnel, each chamber part of a story no outsider was ever supposed to witness. Here's where it gets darker. Those who knew him best spoke of sudden, inexplicable shifts in his moods. One moment charming, disarming, the perfect host. The next, cold and distant, staring off into space as if locked in a battle only he could see. Some described him as haunted, others as paranoid. But maybe he wasn't imagining enemies in the shadows. Maybe he knew exactly what was buried beneath his feet. And let's not ignore the timing of the victims. One after another, their disappearances seemed to align with pivotal moments in Redford's life and career. A critical Sundance deal, a missing businessman, a tabloid sniffing too close to his finances, a vanished journalist, an actress whose name once trailed his in rumors, found decades later beneath his own estate. Doesn't it feel less like coincidence and more like a pattern? Even his activism, the cause that defined him in later years, begins to look different when viewed through this lens. His environmental crusades, his fiery speeches about protecting the land, were they heartfelt? Or were they carefully curated distractions, noble headlines that kept reporters from digging into the rot beneath his own soil? Isn't it ironic that the man who claimed to save nature may have used nature itself as a coffin for his secrets? And then there's the most disturbing question of all. Who else knew? Could one man have orchestrated all of this alone? Or was there a network, friends, allies, accomplices, who kept the silence for decades? Think of the workers who disappeared, the staff who refused to talk, the families who received no answers. Silence doesn't happen by accident. Silence is enforced. The FBI agents, piecing together this secret life, were forced to ask what no one wanted to say aloud. Was Robert Redford, America's golden icon, the charmer, the director, the activist, living a double life? A public hero and a private monster? And as investigators pressed deeper, as the truth crept out of the tunnels like smoke from a hidden fire, the line between the man and the myth shattered. The world had worshipped an illusion. The real Robert Redford, the man whose home was built not as a sanctuary but as a graveyard, was finally being revealed. But the agents hadn't seen the worst of it yet, because what they found next didn't just unravel his image, it pulled back the curtain on Hollywood itself. And the tunnel, it seemed, wasn't just Redford's secret. It was a window into the dark underbelly of an entire industry. Hollywood has always sold itself as a dream factory. The lights, the red carpets, the flashing cameras capturing flawless smiles. But pull back the velvet curtain and you'll see it. The grime, the shadows, the secrets no one dares put on the big screen. Robert Redford's tunnel wasn't just a personal horror. It was a doorway into Hollywood's darkest truths. Because once the FBI started connecting the dots, they realized the bodies beneath his mansion weren't just tied to him. They were tied to the industry itself. Ask yourself this. Why do so many stars vanish at their peak? Why do careers collapse overnight, with no clear explanation? Why do scandals flare up only to disappear under mysterious circumstances, as if someone somewhere decides what the world is allowed to know? The deeper investigators dug, the more it became clear, Hollywood doesn't just make movies. It makes illusions. And Redford, one of its brightest icons, may have been both a beneficiary and a guardian of those illusions. Consider the timing of the victims. That actress, the rising star from the 1980s, who vanished after Sundance. Her story wasn't unique. In the archives of missing persons, names of hopefuls who had brushed too close to the industry glittered like a trail of broken promises. Some were models who suddenly disappeared. Others were journalists working on exposes that never made it to print. Still others were businessmen whose money flowed into film financing before they, too, went missing. Doesn't that suggest a system, not just an accident? And think about the stories Hollywood has long buried. The scandals swept under carpets, the predators shielded by contracts, the rumors dismissed as wild conspiracy until, years later, fragments of truth finally leaked out. How many names do we know now? Names once untouchable, that were protected for decades. Weinstein, Cosby, Epstein, lurking at the edge of celebrity circles. Hollywood thrives on cover-ups. So is it really so unbelievable that Robert Redford's tunnels could have been another mechanism of silence, another graveyard for those who knew too much? The FBI reports, at least the ones that were leaked, spoke of artifacts found alongside the bodies. Tickets from Sundance screenings. Studio contracts never signed. Personal journals with names of executives, directors, producers. Each clue tied the victims not just to Redford's orbit, but to a broader network of Hollywood's elite. One notebook, recovered from the chamber, contained a chilling line. They promised me everything. Then they took it all away. Who were they? Was Redford one man hiding his own sins, or part of something larger? Here's a detail that twists the knife. Some of the bodies dated back to the 1970s, the very years Redford was becoming Hollywood royalty. While he charmed audiences in The Sting and All the President's Men, while critics hailed him as the face of integrity, people were vanishing. Doesn't that contradiction send a shiver down your spine? The world was watching him play heroes on screen, while beneath his home, the whispers of the lost gathered in silence. And the agents couldn't ignore the parallels. The rooms weren't just chambers, they were cells. The scratches on the walls weren't random, they were pleas. One phrase kept appearing, "No way out." Isn't that the perfect metaphor for Hollywood itself? A machine that lures you in with dreams and locks you away when you stop being useful. When news of the discovery began to leak, insiders scrambled. Agents, producers, old friends of Redford, many refused to comment. Others rushed to discredit the reports. But silence can be louder than denial. Why the panic? Why the desperate attempt to distance themselves if this was nothing more than wild speculation? Think of the irony. Redford starred in All the President's Men, a film about uncovering corruption and holding power accountable. He built his image as a truth-teller. Yet here, in the tunnels, was the exact opposite: silence, secrecy, concealment. Was this the cruel joke of Hollywood, that its heroes on screen were its monsters off it? And maybe that's why this story cuts so deep. It forces us to ask whether Redford was an outlier, or whether he was simply the one who got caught. If one golden icon could hide a chamber of bodies beneath his mansion, what else has been hidden beneath the foundations of Hollywood itself? How many careers ended not because of bad luck, but because the truth had to be buried, sometimes literally? The agents pressed further, determined to drag every secret into the light. But the deeper they went, the clearer it became. Redford's tunnel wasn't just his shame. It was Hollywood's reflection, a mirror held up to an industry built on beautiful illusions hiding ugly realities. And as they pushed deeper, they stumbled across something that made their blood run cold. Because it wasn't just bodies in the dark. It was objects, records, evidence. And those objects hinted at something far larger than one man's secret life. Something that suggested Robert Redford's tunnels were only one piece of a much bigger puzzle. The deeper the agents went, the clearer it became that this tunnel wasn't just a burial site. It was a vault, a place where the past had been sealed away, preserved not by accident, but by design. The chamber of bodies was horrifying enough, but when their flashlights swept across the floor and walls of the next passage, they found something even more chilling. Objects, fragments of lives, evidence carefully hidden, as if someone had tried to erase the people now reduced to silence. At first, it looked random. A shoe, a watch, a tattered notebook. But as the agents sifted through the dirt and debris, patterns emerged. These weren't discarded belongings. They were markers, identifiers, proof of who had been dragged into this underground nightmare. Each object whispered a story. Each one dared the investigators to ask, why was this here? One agent lifted a leather-bound journal, its pages warped with moisture. The cover bore initials, ones that matched the name of a missing journalist who had once been investigating financial irregularities at Sundance. The first few pages were legible, a mix of interview notes and cryptic observations. One line stood out. He knows. He always knows. And they'll never let this get out. The rest of the book dissolved into unreadable ink stains, as though time itself had tried to blot out the truth. Nearby lay a vintage film reel canister, dented and rusted. The label had long since worn away, but the handwriting barely remained. Property of Sundance Institute. Inside, the reel was ruined, the film eaten away by damp. What secrets had it contained? A lost documentary? Footage someone didn't want seen? The fact that it was here, underground among lifeless bodies, made one thing clear: it wasn't meant to be found. Then came the photographs. Scattered like fallen leaves, some blurred, some pristine. Smiling faces at film festivals. Red carpets. Parties. Many of the faces were recognizable. Young actors and actresses who had disappeared mysteriously. Their names whispered as Hollywood tragedies. To the world, they were unsolved mysteries. But here, beneath Redford's mansion, their smiles were haunting reminders of lives cut short. And then, a smaller object. A child's toy. A tiny plastic car, bright paint dulled by dirt. Out of place. Terrifying in its innocence. Because it suggested the victims weren't only adults. The agents stared at it in silence, unwilling to speak the thought that clawed its way into their minds. As they cataloged the objects, another pattern revealed itself. Financial documents, half destroyed, bearing names of companies tied to Sundance and Hollywood financiers. Contracts with signatures torn away. Letters addressed to RR that contained fragments of threats or desperate pleas. One read simply, "You can't bury the truth forever." The irony stung. But the most chilling discovery came tucked into a metal box, sealed and buried deeper in the dirt. Inside were tapes, old audio cassettes. Most were unmarked, but one carried a label scrawled in shaky handwriting. Confession. The agents stared at it, silent. Who had recorded it? One of the victims? An accomplice? Or had Redford himself left behind words he never intended to be heard? They couldn't know, not yet. But the fact that it was buried here, hidden with bodies and evidence, suggested it contained something someone desperately wanted silenced. And here's where the dread thickened. The objects didn't just point to individual victims. They painted a picture of an entire network of silence. Journalists, actors, businessmen, locals. People tied by invisible threads to Hollywood, to Sundance, to Robert Redford himself. And each object was a piece of a puzzle no one had wanted solved. One agent whispered, "This isn't just murder. This is history being rewritten." Another added, "Or erased." The Bureau boxed everything, every item logged as evidence. But as they worked, one question grew heavier. Was this Redford's private archive of secrets, or was it a shared vault, a dumping ground for an entire industry's sins? Because the bodies, the scratches, the journals, the tapes, they didn't point only to one man. They hinted at something systemic, something sprawling, something that made Hollywood's golden lights look like a mask for rot. And if the objects were clues, then the tapes were the key. But before they could uncover what was recorded on them, they had to face another storm: the family. Because the moment news began to trickle out, the Redford family's silence, and their reactions, spoke louder than any evidence. And that silence would break the investigation wide open. When news of the discovery began to ripple outward, the first question on everyone's lips was simple: what did the family know? If Robert Redford's mansion concealed a tunnel of horror, could those closest to him have been oblivious? Or had they been complicit in the silence all along? The FBI approached cautiously. This wasn't just about evidence now. It was about legacy, bloodlines, reputation. Redford's children, grandchildren, and surviving relatives suddenly found themselves under an unbearable spotlight. The world wanted answers, but the family's response? Silence. At first, that silence could be excused. Grief, shock, disbelief. After all, how do you reconcile the man you called father or grandfather with the monster suggested by what lay beneath his home? Yet, as days passed, the silence grew heavier. It wasn't just mourning, it began to look like evasion. One family member, who had once spoken openly about Redford's legacy, refused to comment altogether, dodging reporters with carefully worded statements about respecting privacy. Another, when pressed, snapped at a journalist, "You don't know what you're talking about. Leave us alone." Defensive, guarded, almost fearful. Doesn't that make you wonder? If they were innocent, wouldn't they want to shout it from the rooftops? Behind the scenes, investigators pressed harder. Had the family ever questioned the endless construction at the mansion? Had they ever noticed the locked doors, the odd deliveries, the areas forbidden even to them? One former staff member claimed that certain wings of the house were strictly off-limits, even to family. Whenever children wandered too close, Redford himself would step in with sudden, uncharacteristic sternness. "Stay out," he reportedly said once. "That's not for you." What grandfather speaks like that unless he's hiding something? The family's unease grew worse when the FBI showed them photographs of the objects discovered in the tunnels. Jewelry, clothing, a child's toy. Did they recognize anything? Some turned away. One allegedly wept uncontrollably. But the Bureau's notes, leaked later, suggested that at least one relative reacted with something more chilling than grief: familiarity. A cousin, when shown the bracelet belonging to a long-missing young woman, reportedly whispered, "I remember her." The room fell silent. Who was she? Why did the family remember her? And why had no one spoken her name in years? And then there was the issue of the notebook. Pages listing names of victims, including those once connected to Sundance, had been uncovered. Investigators asked the family if they recognized the handwriting. They wouldn't answer. Some stared at the pages in silence. Others left the room entirely. That refusal to respond spoke volumes. If it wasn't Redford's handwriting, was it someone else's within the household? The public, meanwhile, demanded clarity. Fans who had idolized Redford for decades flooded social media with rage, grief, disbelief. Some accused the FBI of fabricating evidence. Others insisted the family owed the world answers. If they knew, one headline screamed, "They're guilty too." And yet, amid the storm, the family remained stubbornly quiet. No public press conference. No heartfelt statement of denial or defense. Just a void. And in that void, conspiracy theories flourished. Did they inherit not only Redford's fortune but also his secrets? Did they know about the tapes, the ones labeled confession? Did they choose silence to protect his image or their own futures? Even more chilling was one anomaly noted by the FBI. Financial records tied to the family showed unexplained payments spanning years. Large sums moving in and out, disguised as charitable donations or property expenses. When investigators traced them, Many led to shell companies with vague connections to construction. Construction, the very same work that had carved tunnels beneath the mansion. Was the family funding secrecy without even realizing it? Or did they know exactly what they were doing? A neighbor later claimed that in Redford's final years, one of his children was seen visiting the property at odd hours, staying not in the main house, but near the basement entrance. What drew them there? Were they caretakers of the secret, or simply curious relatives trapped in a nightmare they couldn't explain? And yet, here's the twist. While most family members avoided the press, one broke the silence. A granddaughter, barely in her 20s, posted a cryptic message online. Just 3 words. We all knew. It was deleted within minutes, but screenshots spread like wildfire. Was it a cry for help? A slip of truth? Or the cruel prank of a grieving young woman? No one could say for sure, but those 3 words left the world trembling.